state your name." The clerk's voice echoed, cold and procedural. "Raymond Johnson, Sergeant, United States Marine Corps." The old black man answered quietly, eyes down, the shackles around his ankles clicking softly as he shifted. A few scoffs rose from the gallery. A homeless man claiming to be a veteran. Absurd. The prosecutor spoke, voice smooth and rehearsed. "The defendant has violated city code 3 times. We recommend 30 days of community service and a ban from downtown areas." Johnson said nothing. No excuses. Just a whisper. "It was cold. I needed somewhere warm. A cook I know leaves food sometimes. His father served with me." Suddenly, the judge froze, staring at the file. Her hand trembled, her voice barely above a breath. "Johnson. Raymond Johnson." Her eyes locked onto the page. It can't be. Not the same man who carried Will out under fire. Iraq, that year. In that single second, fate turned, and the entire courtroom went still. This is the story of a black veteran forgotten by society, until one name echoed through the silence and everything changed. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. All eyes were fixed forward, waiting for the judge to enter. No one noticed him. An old black man, frail and hunched, walked slowly into the courtroom. His hands were cuffed. His coat, a faded military jacket, hung off him like borrowed fabric from a life long gone. No one asked if he was cold. No one cared why he was here. His name was Raymond Johnson, 68 years old, former sergeant, United States Marine Corps, a survivor of 2 wars, now homeless, forgotten, with nothing left but scraps of memory and dreams that shattered in the night. He didn't lower his head in shame. He lowered it from exhaustion. The kind that builds over years. The kind that comes when a country only remembers you during war. When the blood spills. When they need someone to stand between life and death. But now, he was just another man disturbing the peace for sitting near a café too long. A threat because he dared to warm himself by a steam vent. A social issue wearing a worn-out uniform. The cuffs around his wrist left marks on skin toughened by sun and sorrow. But he didn't flinch, didn't complain, didn't speak a word. A Marine doesn't complain about pain, because the greatest pain is being forgotten by the very place you once protected. Then the clerk called his name, Raymond Johnson. Defendant in Case 22B, disturbing the peace, trespassing, failure to comply with police orders. He stood slowly, each joint cracking like brittle wood. But his eyes still held something people hadn't seen in a long time. Silent courage. The room wasn't cold, but Raymond felt the chill anyway. It wasn't the kind that sank into your bones. It was the kind that came from being unwanted, from knowing your presence made people uncomfortable. He stood there, cuffed and quiet. As the bailiff finished reading the charges, his breath was steady, but shallow. Every part of him had learned how to shrink, how to not take up space. Behind him, someone in the back row muttered, "Another bum wasting taxpayer time." Raymond didn't react. What was the point? He'd fought too many battles, both overseas and back home, to waste strength on pride. The judge, Justice Justine Monroe, finally looked up from the file. Her eyes were sharp, calm, practiced. But as she flipped to the second page of his record, her brows slowly drew together. She stopped, not visibly, not dramatically, but her hand, holding the pen, hovered, paused in a way only someone who'd seen too much would recognize. Raymond didn't notice. His eyes had dropped again, this time to a corner of the bench where dust had gathered. He remembered dust like that in Fallujah, dry, gray, coating your tongue and boots and hope. The judge asked, "Why that location? Mr. Johnson?" He looked up, surprised by the question. "Ma'am, the kitchen vent puts out warm air. I wasn't hurting no one. Jimmy, the cook. He knows me, his dad. His dad and I served together." Something in his voice cracked just then, and for the first time that day, the courtroom actually heard him. Not the defendant, not the homeless man, but the Marine, still standing, still trying, still hoping someone remembered. The judge didn't speak right away. Her fingers gently touched the edge of the file again, almost reluctant to turn the page. Raymond stood still, hands clasped in front of him, wrists red where the cuffs had been moments ago. The bailiff had loosened them at the bench. A small kindness. He wasn't used to kindness. "Mr. Johnson," the judge said finally, her tone quieter now. "Your service record indicates deployment to Iraq, Fallujah, 2003. Is that correct?" Raymond blinked, his shoulders pulled back instinctively. "Yes, ma'am, 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines, and prior to that?" He hesitated. "Desert Storm, then Recon, then I trained incoming." She nodded slowly, the wheels clearly turning behind her eyes. Raymond saw the change, but didn't understand it. Why was she asking this? No one had cared about that part of his life in years. Not when he applied for aid. Not when he slept outside the VA clinic. Not when they told him his paperwork was missing. The prosecutor stirred but said nothing. Even he sensed something had shifted. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Like the courtroom itself was holding its breath. Raymond's mind drifted again, back to nights spent curled near alley vents, hoping for warmth, back to days when a uniform meant something. Maybe it still did, to someone, for the first time in a long while. His name wasn't just being read off a charge sheet. It was being remembered, and not as a problem, as a person, a man who had once stood in another court of war, of life, and chosen to save others. Now he waited to see if anyone would choose to save him. The courtroom remained quiet, but the silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like possibility. The silence didn't last long. From the prosecutor's table, a young man in a gray suit stood, smooth and polished, like someone who'd never missed a meal or a warm bed. His voice cut through the room, sharp, official, almost indifferent. "Your Honor, the city charges Mr. Johnson with repeated violations of local code, specifically loitering behind Washington Street Café. He has received 2 formal warnings, and this marks the 3rd citation in less than 60 days. Raymond didn't move. The prosecutor continued, stacking his words like building blocks of blame. "The cafe owner has submitted multiple complaints. Employees report discomfort. Police were dispatched on 3 occasions. Each time, the defendant was found lingering after hours, despite being told to vacate." He turned slightly toward Raymond, not with anger, something colder. Dismissal. But what he fails to mention, Raymond thought, is that I never begged, never asked for a thing. He was just there, quiet, sitting close to the kitchen vent that blew warm air into the night. Jimmy, the cook, would sometimes slip him half a sandwich. They never spoke much, Just a nod. Just enough. Now that act of survival was being rewritten as a crime. The prosecutor's voice remained flat. The state recommends 30 days of community service and a no trespass order for downtown businesses. Raymond's head lifted. He knew what that meant. The shelter, the church meals, the clinic near 4th and Grant. All gone. With that one ruling, they would freeze him out entirely. Not with fists, not with slurs, but with a legal pen. Raymond didn't flinch. He had survived worse. But this was how dignity died in modern America, not in a battlefield, but in a courtroom, surrounded by people who chose not to see. Officer Daniels, you may proceed with your testimony. The judge said. A uniformed officer took the stand, late 30s, clean cut, posture perfect. His voice was calm, rehearsed. At approximately 11:45 p.m., I found the defendant sitting behind the café, near the exhaust vent. I informed him he was trespassing and instructed him to leave. He refused. Raymond's jaw tensed. That's not true, he wanted to say. But who would listen? I didn't refuse, he thought. I asked for 5 more minutes, just to finish that sandwich. That sandwich Jimmy had slipped him, wrapped in a napkin, ham and mustard. Still warm. Raymond had said it quiet, respectful. Please, officer, just a few more bites, then I'll go. But back then, his words hadn't mattered, and judging by the silence in the room, they still didn't now. The officer continued. He became argumentative and failed to comply. I had no choice but to place him under arrest. There it was, the rewrite. The moment of quiet hunger transformed into a charge of resistance. Raymond looked down again, hiding the fire behind his eyes. The courtroom didn't need to see it. They wouldn't understand it. Not the years it took to stay alive with nothing, not the effort it took to remain kind, even when the world forgot him. Now they wanted to erase the last spaces he could survive. The prosecutor added, if the no trespass order is approved, it will apply to all city-owned properties within the downtown radius. Raymond closed his eyes. The only shelter, the only clinic, the only warmth he had left, all about to vanish with a judge's nod. And not one person in that courtroom had spoken a word for him yet. Not yet. The judge tapped her pen softly on the desk. The rhythm was steady, but her eyes remained on Raymond. Something in her expression was shifting, like she was trying to remember a name half lost in time. But the courtroom moved forward as if nothing was strange. As this is the 3rd citation within a 2-month window, the prosecutor concluded, we believe further leniency would send the wrong message to other offenders. Offenders, that's what they called him now. Not veteran, not sergeant, not even Raymond. Just a nuisance, a repeat violator of peace. Raymond took a breath. Shallow but steady. He'd trained his body long ago to withstand pressure heat, hunger, fear. But this was colder than any battlefield. He raised his head again. Ma'am, he said. Voice low but firm. I wasn't trying to cause trouble. I just didn't have nowhere else to go. The judge didn't interrupt. She let him speak. I sit where it's warm. That's it. I'm not asking for nothing. Jimmy, the cook. He knows me. We don't say much. But he leaves food sometimes. His dad fought next to me in '91. Desert Storm. He knew what cold nights felt like. His voice broke slightly on the last words. The prosecutor shifted in his seat. Uneasy now. The judge closed the file in front of her. Not harshly, almost gently. Raymond felt the silence again, but this time it had a different weight, like the whole room was holding something back. For a moment. Just a moment. He thought maybe he wouldn't have to carry this alone anymore. But hope was dangerous, especially for men like him. So he pushed it down, stood still, and waited for whatever came next. The judge leaned back slightly, hands folded. Her gaze lingered on Raymond longer than before, but it was the prosecutor who broke the silence. Your Honor, while we respect the defendant's prior military service, it does not excuse repeated violations of city code. The law must be applied equally. A few heads nodded in the gallery, others barely looked up. Raymond stood there alone, worn, cuffed like a relic from a war no one wanted to remember. You see, the prosecutor added, voice a touch sharper now. This is the third time he's disrupted this specific business. It's become a pattern. He refuses to leave. Employees feel unsafe. The cafe owner has expressed concern about losing customers. Unsafe. That word hung in the air. Raymond almost laughed, but he didn't, because he knew what that word really meant in their eyes. A black man, old, poor, alone, not shouting, not threatening, just existing where someone didn't want to see him. That somehow was unsafe. He shifted his weight. His knees ached, but more than that, something deeper cracked inside him, not from the accusations, but from the stares, the way people avoided his eyes, the way his presence filled the room with discomfort instead of dignity. He'd once walked through fire for this country. Now he couldn't sit near a restaurant without being labeled a threat. The judge asked, Mr. Johnson, do you understand the consequences of a no trespass order? Raymond nodded once. It would bar you from downtown entirely, including the shelters. The food lines, the clinic, she said. Her voice more careful now. I understand. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He just stood there. A man stripped of medals. Stripped of home. Now being stripped of space. And still, he stood. The room had settled into that familiar kind of quiet, the kind that comes not from respect, but from discomfort. Raymond could feel their eyes, not curious, not kind, just watching, as if they were waiting for him to break, to yell, to fall apart, to confirm whatever they already believed about men who looked like him, lived like him, but he wouldn't give them that. He kept his chin steady, shoulders straight. He'd learned long ago when the world wants you invisible. The most powerful thing you can do is remain. The prosecutor cleared his throat, almost impatient now. We're not asking for incarceration, Your Honor. Just boundaries, rules, accountability. The word stung, sharp and false. No one had been held accountable when Raymond's disability benefits vanished in bureaucracy. No one had been accountable when his PTSD went untreated, or when he was evicted from housing that was supposed to be secure. But now, suddenly, everyone wanted rules. For him, only him. The judge turned a page slowly, lips pursed. She seemed to study something deeper than charges, something off script. Raymond didn't know why. He just knew this felt different. But still, no one had spoken up. Not Jimmy, not a friend, not a stranger, not even the system he'd served. He stood alone, again. And that loneliness under fluorescent lights and courtroom ceilings felt worse than any battlefield. Because at least in war, you knew who had your back. Here, he wasn't so sure. Raymond's hands tightened around each other, knuckles pale under the courtroom light. He had no words left to defend himself, no witnesses, no advocate, just the truth. And the truth never seemed to be enough. He felt like a museum piece, stuck behind glass for strangers to judge outdated, discarded, misunderstood. They saw a problem. He was still trying to remember the last time someone saw a person. The judge closed the file at last, her face unreadable. But something in her silence held weight, like she wasn't just deciding on a case but unraveling a memory. Raymond didn't know it yet, but his name had stirred something old, something sacred. Still, for now, all he saw was the same routine. A man, stripped bare by process, another name on a docket. He exhaled slowly, ready to hear the sentence. But then the courtroom door opened. Firm steps echoed down the aisle. Shoes that didn't belong to the public defender. A presence too strong to be coincidence. Raymond turned slightly, confused. And for the first time that morning, someone walked in, not to watch him fall but to stand beside him. Change, it seemed, had finally entered the room. The footsteps stopped at the defense table. A tall man in a tailored navy suit set down his briefcase with quiet precision. He didn't glance at the gallery, didn't acknowledge the stares. His focus was entirely on the bench. "Your Honor," he said, voice calm and clear. "Marcus Lang. I've just been retained to represent Mr. Johnson." Raymond blinked. He'd never seen this man before. He certainly hadn't hired him. "Sir, I can't pay," he began. Lang leaned in, voice low. "You won't need to. This is pro bono. We've got you." The judge tilted her head. "Mr. Lang, the court wasn't notified of this representation. It was a last-minute development." Lang replied, "But I respectfully request a brief recess to speak with my client." The judge hesitated, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. Then she nodded once. 15 minutes. She said, "Court is in recess." The gavel tapped gently, a sound that usually ended things, but this time it marked a beginning. Raymond sat down, stunned. He didn't know who this man was, didn't know how he got here. But for the first time since his arrest, he wasn't alone at the table. And that changed everything. In the conference room behind the courtroom, the air felt heavier, more personal. Raymond sat stiffly, still unsure if this was real. Marcus Lang opened a folder, but didn't speak from it. Instead, he looked directly at Raymond. "My firm took interest in your case because someone recognized your name." Raymond frowned. "My name?" Lang nodded. "Someone who's been looking for you for years." That made no sense. "Judge Monroe," Lang added. Raymond blinked again, slower this time. Lang leaned forward, voice quiet but firm. "Her brother. Lieutenant Will Monroe, he served with you, didn't he?" Fallujah. April 2003. Silence. Raymond swallowed hard. His voice came out rough, almost broken. "I carried him out, under fire. He took a round to the chest, kept yelling at me to leave him, help the others." "You didn't know, sir." "I didn't." Lang nodded slowly. "He wrote home about that, about you." Raymond looked away, eyes shining with memory. "I always wondered if he made it. He did. But 2 weeks later, he was killed by an IED." Raymond closed his eyes, and in that moment, everything inside him cracked, but not from guilt, from being remembered, from finally being seen. Not as a burden, but as a name worth finding. Back in her chambers, Judge Justine Monroe stood motionless, hands pressed against her desk. Before her lay a single photograph, faded, edges curled. It showed a young Marine in dress blues, smiling wide with his arm around her. Her brother, Will. Beside it, a worn letter, his last one. She picked it up, fingers trembling. If not for Sergeant Johnson, I wouldn't be alive today. He dragged me out under fire, patched me up, and held the line so the others could retreat. He said one thing before he ran back into the smoke. No one gets left behind. Not on my watch. Her breath caught. That line had stayed with her for 20 years, and now the man who said it sat in her courtroom unhoused, unseen, nearly erased. She didn't remember his face, but that name had haunted her for 2 decades. She reached for the phone. "Colonel Atkins," she said, voice steadying. "I need a favor. Yes, it's urgent." There was no more room for delay. The courtroom had tried to strip Raymond Johnson of dignity, but this time, justice remembered his name. And she was about to remind everyone else. 10 minutes later, the courtroom doors opened again. This time, 3 men entered, not lawyers, not bailiffs, Marines, a full colonel in full dress blues, a master sergeant beside him, and behind them, a young corporal carrying a polished wooden case. Gasps spread through the room like wind through dry leaves. Every head turned. Raymond Johnson stood, instinct overriding pain. His spine straightened, his chin lifted. The years fell away like dust shaken loose. Muscle memory, discipline, pride still in him, even after all this time. The judge returned to the bench. She didn't sit immediately. Her robe moved slightly as she took a long breath. "This court," she said, voice steady, "has learned new and compelling information that directly affects today's proceedings." She looked directly at Raymond. "The man before us is not simply a defendant. He is a decorated Marine, a protector, a survivor of multiple combat tours." The colonel stepped forward, his voice firm and clear. "Staff Sergeant Raymond Johnson, the Marine Corps has been searching for you. Your file was flagged during a veterans review. We discovered you were never properly awarded for actions taken in Fallujah." He turned to the corporal, who opened the case. Inside, a medal gleaming in velvet blue, the Navy Cross. A stunned hush swept the room. Even the prosecutor, moments ago so certain, now stood frozen mouth slightly open, objections dying in his throat. Colonel Atkins held the medal high. By order of the Secretary of the Navy, in recognition of extraordinary heroism on April 12, 2003, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Raymond E. Johnson. Raymond didn't move. He couldn't. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of being seen. "For your actions," the colonel continued, "which not only saved Lieutenant Monroe's life, but directly prevented the loss of your entire unit during a coordinated enemy ambush. This recognition is long overdue." Behind them, the master sergeant added, "We've also reopened your VA case. Your disability status has been updated to 100% retroactive. You are now eligible for full benefits, back pay, housing, and support." Raymond blinked. Words like support and benefits had felt like myths for years. Now they were standing in front of him. In dress blues, saying his name like it mattered. A silver-haired man in the gallery suddenly stood, attention on deck. He called out sharply. One by one, veterans, officers, even civilians, rose to their feet, and for the first time in decades, Raymond Johnson was saluted. Raymond's throat tightened. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The courtroom that once looked down on him now stood in solemn silence, heads high, backs straight, not out of obligation, but out of reverence. The judge removed her glasses and stepped down from the bench. No robe, no distance, just a sister, standing before the man who had once saved her brother. "Sergeant Johnson," she said softly, voice thick with emotion. "I was only 16 when you carried Will to safety. I never forgot his letters. He called you a giant among men." Raymond's eyes welled. He tried to look away, but she stepped closer. "You didn't leave him behind," she whispered, "and today we will not leave you." She turned to the room. "All charges against Staff Sergeant Johnson are hereby dismissed, permanently. Let the record reflect this man is not a threat, he is a national treasure." She brought the gavel down one last time, but this wasn't a ruling. It was a reckoning. Raymond, shoulders trembling, slowly raised his hand in salute, returning the honor one last time. Not for ceremony, but for closure. In that moment, he wasn't homeless. He wasn't forgotten. He was exactly who he had always been. A Marine. As the courtroom emptied, Raymond remained standing, unsure if his legs were shaking from exhaustion or release. The master sergeant approached with a tablet. "Sir," he said gently, "we've started processing your VA benefits. Your back pay alone will cover a home, medical care, and more. You won't need to sleep outside another night." Raymond nodded slowly, still trying to understand what it meant to be seen after so many years of invisibility. Marcus Lang joined him at the table. "We'll make sure every form gets filed. Every dollar reaches you. No more red tape. You have a team now." From the back of the room, a familiar face stepped forward. Jimmy, the cook from the café, the kid who used to leave food by the vent. His eyes were full. "My dad used to tell me stories about you," he said, voice trembling. "He said if I ever met a Marine named Johnson, I owed him everything. He reached out a hand. I didn't know it was you, not until today." Raymond hesitated, then took it. In that quiet handshake, a bridge was built. Between generations, between memory and now. The courtroom had turned its back, but life just maybe was turning forward again. The prosecutor lingered near his table, clearly shaken. His carefully combed hair and polished shoes suddenly looked out of place in the room that had just saluted a man he'd nearly sentenced to the streets. He stepped forward slowly. "Mr. Johnson," he began. "Unsure. I had no idea who you were. I just saw another citation, another file." Raymond didn't speak, not out of spite, just tiredness. The prosecutor's voice dropped. "Please accept my apology, not just for the case but for everything the system failed to see." Raymond gave a quiet nod. Nothing more. The man who once tried to erase him with paperwork now stood humbled, staring at someone whose quiet power had rewritten the whole room. Judge Monroe returned, no longer in robes, just herself. She didn't speak at first, just stood in front of Raymond. Then she said, low but certain, "My brother used to say, the measure of a Marine isn't what he does in front of others. It's what he does when no one's watching." Her eyes filled. You lived that. Raymond felt something loosen inside him. Not anger, not pride. Just peace. A kind he hadn't known in years, because for the first time, they saw the whole of him. Raymond sat alone on the bench outside the courthouse, the sun warming his face for the first time that day. In his pocket was a letter official and stamped confirming his Navy Cross, full VA benefits, and housing placement, not a shelter, a home, one with his name on the lease. He turned the metal case slowly in his hands, feeling the velvet, the weight of the metal inside. It didn't change the years he'd lost, but it meant they weren't forgotten. Judge Monroe joined him, no longer carrying authority, just memory. "I found something," she said, handing him a small envelope. Inside, a photograph her and her brother, arm in arm, years before the war. "He talked about you more than anyone," she added softly. "You didn't just save him. You shaped him." Raymond stared at the photo for a long moment, then said, "He was brave, even when he was scared." "So were you," she replied. A long silence passed. Then she asked, "What now?" Raymond looked out toward the street, cars passing, people rushing. "I think," he said slowly, "I'll go home." And this time, when he stood, he wasn't walking away from anything. He was walking toward something new, something whole. 2 weeks later, Raymond stood in front of a mirror in a quiet apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much simple walls, second-hand furniture. A small kitchen, but it was his, the rent covered, the fridge full, the bed warm, on the wall. A single frame hung above the desk. Inside it the Navy Cross, his long-lost service medals, and a folded letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Below them, tucked neatly, was a photograph of Lieutenant Will Monroe, smiling in his dress blues. Raymond adjusted his collar, still not used to the stillness. The silence here wasn't cold anymore. It was peace. There were nights when he still woke up too fast, body tense, heart racing. But now, he had a door that locked, a roof that held, a chair that didn't scrape pavement when he sat down. He sat at the desk and opened the drawer. Inside letters, real ones, from people who'd seen the news, from veterans, from strangers who said they'd never forget him now. He didn't answer most. He wasn't good with words, but he read every one, because, for once, the world wasn't asking him for anything. It was simply saying, "We remember." One letter stood out among the others. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged, the envelope folded like it had been carried in a pocket for days. Raymond opened it carefully. "Mr. Johnson," it began, "my father served with you in Fallujah." He never talked much about the war, but he always spoke your name with pride. After he passed, "I found your story. I just want you to know you were his hero, and now, you're mine too." Raymond set the letter down, pressing his hand gently over it. For a moment, his eyes closed. He wasn't used to being called that, hero. He always said he just did his job, but maybe that was enough. He stood, walked to the window, outside. Snow had begun to fall, soft and slow, coating the sidewalks in quiet white. He used to dread nights like this, the cold, the wind, but not anymore. Now, someone had said his name, not as a warning, not as a case number, as a memory, as a man, in that small apartment. Raymond Johnson smiled to himself, because the world hadn't just remembered what he did. It finally remembered who he was. Later that evening, Raymond sat on the floor with a small box in front of him. Inside were the only things he'd managed to keep over the years' dog tags. A photo of his squad, a patch from his last deployment, pieces of a life lived in silence, far from headlines or praise. He picked up the photo, the edges worn soft from time. 5 men stood shoulder to shoulder, dusty and sunburned, eyes squinting against the Iraqi sun. He remembered each name, each voice, each laugh. He remembered who didn't come home. As he placed the photo back in the box, his eyes caught the frame on the wall once more. The Navy Cross, a symbol not of glory but of endurance, of doing what had to be done even when no one was watching. He stood, knees cracking, but his spine held straight, not out of duty, out of dignity. This was the lesson, wasn't it? Not that the world will always see you, but that the fight to remain true, to remain good, still matters. Even when no one's clapping, even when you're standing alone in the cold. Because somewhere, someday, someone will remember, and that memory is enough to bring you home. The morning sun cast a soft glow across the quiet street as Raymond Johnson stepped out of his apartment. He wore a dark hoodie over a clean shirt, the hood pulled up gently not to hide, but out of habit, a silent armor he'd worn through too many years on cold sidewalks. But today, he didn't need to disappear. A man nodded at him as he passed. A woman offered a smile, small things, human things, the kind that used to vanish the moment people saw his skin, his clothes, his weariness. Now, they looked again, and they saw more. Raymond walked past the café where it all began. Jimmy was inside, wiping down tables, already prepping for the lunch crowd. Their eyes met through the glass. Jimmy raised 2 fingers in a quiet salute. Raymond gave a slow nod back. He didn't need to stop. Didn't need warmth from the vent anymore, because now he carried that warmth inside him, not from medals or courts or recognition, but from the simple truth that after everything, every forgotten year, every silent night, someone had said his name, and this time the world listened. He walked on, steady, quiet, but never invisible again. Raymond took the long way home. He didn't have to, but for the first time in years, he walked not because he had nowhere to go, but because he could. Each step felt lighter, not because the past was gone, it would always be with him. The names, the noise, the silence. But now, the weight was shared. As he crossed the small park near the Veterans Center, he saw a younger man sitting on a bench. Hoodie pulled low, hands stuffed in his sleeves, gaze cast downward, familiar posture, familiar pain. Raymond paused, just for a second, then walked over. "Cold out here," he said gently. The young man looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah." Raymond didn't offer pity, didn't preach. He just sat beside him, both of them quiet. After a long pause, he pulled a card from his wallet, handed it over. "Veterans Outreach. They helped me. Might help you too." The young man took it slowly, eyes narrowing. "You a vet?" Raymond smiled, soft and proud. "Yeah, I am. No cape, no speech. Just presence. Silent power." Then he stood, pulled his hood back up, and kept walking, and the city, no longer blind, watched him go. As Raymond reached his block, the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, gentle. But he didn't flinch. He'd faced storms harsher than this, nights colder, winds meaner. Now, the flakes touched his shoulders like a quiet benediction. Not punishment, peace. He paused at the steps to his building, hand resting on the rail, looked up at the sky, not searching, just grateful. Behind him, a car passed. A woman in the passenger seat stared as they drove by, then turned to her child in the back. "That's the man I told you about," she whispered. "The one who saved people. The one the judge saluted." The little boy peeked out the window. Watch the man in the hoodie. Raymond didn't hear it, but somehow, deep in his bones, he felt it. His story had reached someone else, someone young, someone listening, and that was enough. He stepped inside. The door closed quietly behind him, and though the city outside moved on traffic, chatter, noise, something had shifted. Because a man who once walked unnoticed now left footprints the world could feel, not with glory, but with grace. Not loud, but lasting. The silent power of being remembered and never again erased. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us bring more powerful stories of empathy, justice, and silent strength to life. Your support is what fuels this journey. Let's keep standing together and rising higher. One story at a time. Stay safe and inspired.